The NHL All-Star break has come to an end. We're about to resume a normal NHL schedule, and we have plenty more NHL trade rumors to discuss today. Teams we're looking at today include the Avalanche, the Blues, the Bruins, the Habs, and the Golden Knights. We'll jump into all the latest coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL trade rumors I want to take a look at today. Plus, we also have a few other tidbits of information to discuss today as well. The Columbus Blue Jackets have announced that they've extended pending RFA forward Eric Robinson to a 2-year contract extension. Of course, Robinson was a college free agent signing out of Princeton. He's been in the Blue Jackets organization for about 3 years now, currently playing a fair bit of games at the NHL level for the current season, where he's put up 9 points in 31 games, and the 2-year extension also is a one-way deal. So that certainly shows they have more confidence in him to be a regular NHL player, and it certainly guarantees him a bigger salary should he end up having to go through waivers and be demoted to the American Hockey League during the terms of that contract. And we've also seen a few other moves here as well. The St. Louis Blues did place veteran forward Troy Brouwer on waivers, so of course he could end up being claimed. As I record this video, it's earlier enough in the day that the waiver wire announcements haven't been made as of yet, so stay tuned to the pinned comment down below. If there was a claim made, I'll certainly update the information down below as you can see if he ended up going to another team, but more than likely I'd say he probably won't be claimed and likely gets assigned to the American Hockey League. We'll have to monitor that situation. Of course, Brouwer was signed as a late season addition to the Blues, and we'll see if he will report or what might take place in that situation there as well. Lastly here, one other quick tidbit of news. The New York Rangers prospect Elias Andersson, of course, went back to Sweden, was suspended from the Rangers organization after leaving on not so favorable terms, has been loaned to play with Team HV71 in the SHL, and it's been reported lately that dialogue has been better between Andersson and the Rangers management team, so certainly things have kind of progressed in that regard. This is a good move for both the player and the team. Of course, he gets to get back on the ice, get playing, and if he does well, like we saw with Jesse Puljujarvi, that could generate some more interest. I mean, Puljujarvi didn't end up going anywhere here as of yet. Puljujarvi's case, he can't play in the NHL this year because he wasn't signed by December 1st, but Andersson technically does have a contract, and if he could return to North America, he could play NHL games or American Hockey League games later in the season if he was moved by the deadline. So with just under a month to go, gives him an opportunity to showcase himself, and maybe we do end up seeing a trade take place. Not really sure at this point if there's any possibility of the two kind of mending fences and getting Andersson back with the Rangers organization, or if a deal is still inevitable. I guess we'll see what happens here. If there's any interest in Andersson, first of all, to make an acquisition before the NHL trade deadline. Now jumping over to today's NHL trade rumors, I wanted to take a look at some information posted in the Denver Post talking about the fact that the Avalanche should be looking to upgrade their goaltending and defense ahead of the NHL playoffs. The writer of this article indicates that the goaltending has not been great and needs some defensive depth, and really I will agree with part of that. I do think most NHL teams could benefit from having a lot of defensive depth heading into the playoffs. If you're going to be successful winning a Stanley Cup or at least going to the finals, you're going to need probably anywhere from 8, 9, maybe even 10 defensemen for a long, healthy playoff run, to not be relying on too many inexperienced players, because clearly there's a lot of injuries take place. The playoffs are certainly a rougher version of hockey that we see in the regular season, and oftentimes there are lots of injuries. So I do agree with that, but the fact that there's been a lot of talk online in various articles, and it seems to be lots of fans discussing it as well through social media, that the Avalanche need a more reliable, more experienced goaltender seems to be the trend that I've been seeing a lot lately, and this article touches on that as well, indicating that there's not a lot of confidence in Grubauer and Francouz to kind of lead them into the playoffs and to have any amount of success. This article suggests that longtime NHL goaltenders Henrik Lundqvist and Jonathan Quick be the targets of trade that the Avalanche should be looking to bring in here. The Avalanche do have a big amount of salary cap space available, so they could take on a big contract. I mean, we saw some talk earlier about Carey Price and the Avalanche, which I discussed in a video and completely dismissed the notion of. I don't see that happening. And to be honest, I don't see this happening either. Like Lundqvist and Quick, and you know what? They both had terrific NHL careers, but I really don't see either of them being the solution to the Avalanche, and really at this point being anything of an upgrade, really. I mean, in Lundqvist's case, he's got a full no-move clause, and he's made it pretty clear that he doesn't seem to be all that interested in moving along, so I would be shocked if he did agree to do that. At the same time, I do understand that he might decide last minute here at some point that he wants to chase a Stanley Cup. But in New York, Georgiev seems to be the more likely guy to move on, and Lundqvist and Shesterkin appear to be the tandem moving forward. At least that's my opinion on the Rangers' goaltending situation. In the case of Jonathan Quick, his numbers haven't been good for a couple of years now. I don't see him as being an upgrade over the current tandem in the Avalanche. I mean, if you look at the stats, and I'll put them up here on the screen courtesy of CapFriendly.com, the Avalanche goaltenders really are not doing that bad. They might not be doing as well as some other goalies around other NHL playoff teams, but if you're looking at what's available, what would make sense for a trade, I just don't see these guys being an upgrade. Jonathan Quick's stats have not been great. I know the Kings haven't been a good team really the last couple of years, but overall, why would you want to take on an aging goaltender who's had a lot of injury issues with a fair bit of term left? Now, Jonathan Quick doesn't have the trade protection in his contract, so a move could be more likely. At the same time, his contract's not as hefty as some of the other guys like a Lundqvist either, but still, I don't see the point in bringing in a guy like him who still has a fair bit of term left, and I'm not really sure what the asking price would have to be. I can see the Kings being interested in trading Quick. That side of it makes absolute sense to me. I can see them wanting to go with guys like Campbell and Peterson for the next few years, see how that goes. That, to me, from LA's point of view, makes a lot of sense. I just don't think the Avalanche are the right destination here. You could always see the possibility of players being traded and rejuvenating their careers. I just don't know if that one makes sense based on the term, and I just don't see them being as an upgrade at all. So for Avalanche fans especially watching this, do you see Jonathan Quick, Henrik Lundqvist, or any other elite, older, big-time contract NHL goaltenders that would potentially be available being an upgrade over the current tandem of Grubauer and Francouz, and do you think that is a move the Avalanche should make? I'm the Avalanche personally. I could see adding some extra depth on the defense. I could see maybe adding another scoring winger perhaps, if that's a possibility, depending on what's out there, like a Chris Kreider, for example, who we've linked to the Avalanche as well as other teams. We're going to discuss him here momentarily. I could see a move like that making sense for the Avalanche, but not necessarily a big-time move that's going to be costly in the goaltending situation. But I'd like to know what you think in the comments below. Now, sticking with the theme of players maybe rejuvenating their careers and moving on to chase a Stanley Cup, let's jump over and take a look at the Boston Bruins. I've come across a couple articles lately discussing the fact that the Sharks could look to move veterans Joe Thornton and Patrick Marleau so they can go chase down a Stanley Cup before their careers are over. Now, of course, we saw Marleau leave previously, go to the Leafs for a couple of years, and he ended up wanting to go back to San Jose. So as much as I do think he had a good experience in Toronto, he never got the cup he was looking for. In Thornton's case, there's been some links and some discussion, but what if he actually went back to where he started in Boston? There's an article from NBC Sports, Joe Haggerty, discussing the possibility, the fact that it likely wouldn't cost a whole lot to acquire Jumbo Joe. He could very well be a good bottom six center. I know he's not as productive as he used to be, but certainly looking at his stats, there's certainly an upgrade over a few of the bottom six guys in Boston, in my opinion. Certainly better than Per Lindholm, and I know that's not saying a whole heck of a lot, but either way, he adds a ton of experience there. He's been around the NHL forever. He's a great leader. Goes back to where he started, could come full circle. The Bruins are definitely going to be a team who are looked upon as being a cup contender for sure, and put him as their third or fourth line center could make a lot of sense. This article goes on to say from Haggerty here that perhaps putting him with a couple of young wingers like a Heinen and a Bjork very well could be the guidance that they need to help them be more productive here as well. And if you look at their stats, I know Thornton doesn't have a lot of goals this year, but he still has a decent amount of assists considering the role and age and everything where he's at in his career right now. So it does make some sense. I mean, obviously the Bruins might have some bigger targets that they're looking at, and they very well might be able to pull that off as well. I just think with the fact that Thornton not making a ton of money and wouldn't have to give up a ton to get him, it should be at least something they consider. I know there's probably some other moves out there that might make more sense, but having Jumbo Joe chase down that Stanley Cup certainly makes sense. Now, of course, Joe was asked about the possibility of moving away from San Jose to chase the Stanley Cup, and basically he said he hadn't really given it a lot of thought yet, but it's something that he needs to think about, I guess. If you look here, I'll give you a snippet from an article from NBC Sports here. He recently talked to Kevin Kurz from The Athletic, who was quoted in this article from NBC, and you know what? He didn't actually flat out deny the fact that he wouldn't want to be traded. In the past, whenever he's been asked, it's always been, no, I'm a Shark for life, whereas this was a different answer, and it doesn't mean he definitely wants to be traded or anything like that, but at least the fact that he seemed to be, it wasn't a complete shutdown of the notion of moving on. So I guess we'll see what happens, but the Sharks are clearly falling out of the playoff picture, and could he be moved? It's certainly a possibility. I can imagine that at the very least, Doug Wilson will go to his veteran guys like Thornton and Marleau, ask them if they want that opportunity, and if they do, he'll likely try to help them out and find a move to a contender to see if they can finally get their name on a Stanley Cup. But if you're a Bruins fan, would you welcome back Jumbo Joe, and do you think that's a move they should consider for a bottom six role? Now let's jump over and take a look at the defending Stanley Cup champion St. Louis Blues. There was a recent interview here with Doug Armstrong kind of discussing the possibility of what he might be doing ahead of the deadline, and he says a lot depends on the return of Vladimir Tarasenko. Now, he went down and had surgery on October the 24th, I believe it was, and it's expected that it'd be about a 6-month recovery process. It was about 5 months, they said, that for him to be reevaluated and more updates provided at that time. He did say all he knew at this point is that he was coming along nicely as far as, basically what he was expected to be, but it's typically a 6-month recovery before you can start to play again at this point. Now, it's believed that Tarasenko has started skating again, but obviously the fact that he's skating to work on his cardio doesn't really mean that the shoulder's anywhere close to being ready. Now, 6 months puts us at the end of April. Obviously, 5 months puts us near the end of March. So if he can do it a little bit sooner, there is a slim possibility he could squeak in before the end of the regular season and get some games in. And for him to be activated before the end of the regular season, they have to have space to do that. But basically, Armstrong said if Tarasenko is likely not going to be ready to go before the end of the regular season, that's certainly something they're going to take a look at. And many believe that Chris Kreider would be the perfect fit in St. Louis, given the fact that he's a rental player, certainly having a decent year, was just about the All-Star game. It certainly can be productive and play in that top six and be that physical presence as well. Of course, they had Pat Maroon last year, who has since moved on. Maybe Kreider can play a little bit more of an offensive role, but yet still provide that same kind of physicality that Maroon did. Even though Maroon didn't have a terrific offensive season when it came to the playoffs, he certainly was able to contribute heavily with his style of play, and I think Kreider can do that and more. So certainly something they should at least consider, but we'll see what happens here with Tarasenko's recovery and how that impacts the Blues' plans ahead of the deadline. Now, it's also been known that the Vegas Golden Knights are looking for a puck-moving defenseman, preferably somebody on the right side, and there's been a lot of discussion lately about the possibility that there could be interest to the Montreal Canadiens defenseman Jeff Petrie. Now, for Habs fans, I want to assure you this does not mean that Marc Bergevin has been pushing the fact of trading Petrie or that he's out there discussing him. It just means that many believe that the Vegas Golden Knights have interest and that there very well could be the fact they might be going to Montreal to engage in trade talks. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. I guess it really boils down to what is being offered, and Bergevin will have to take that under consideration. I don't see Petrie as being a completely untouchable, but at the same time, I don't see him being the type of player that Bergevin would be actively looking to trade. But Petrie has a lot about his game that's appealing to teams looking for a puck-moving defenseman. For starters, he's got one more year left on his contract, so he's not a pure rental. He's a right shot, which is a little bit more challenging to find in today's game. And he can certainly move the puck, play in the power play, and be a fairly good offensive contributor. So he has a lot of what Vegas is looking for, and he's not signed to a ridiculous contract either. So from a cap perspective, for most teams, it's a little bit easier to squeeze in. Now, of course, I have no idea what Vegas would offer to Montreal in return, but I do think that it's quite possible that they very well could be engaging in talks to see if they can make the acquisition. But of course, he's not the only guy out there that makes sense for them. They very well might go down the rental road as well. It just kind of depends on what the asking price turns out to be for all these players. Too as well would be a guy like Tony DeAngelo with the New York Rangers. As I mentioned, I'm not 100% certain that he's going to be sticking around with the Rangers long term, even though you might think it's crazy for them to move him. He's going to be looking for a substantial raise. Obviously, he's having a terrific year, had a really solid year last year, didn't get much of a bump up in pay at all. He's going to be looking for it on this next contract. And they've already got longer term deals in place for guys like Trouba and Shea. They have Adam Fox. They may not be able to keep all of them longer term to keep the cost of the blue line a little bit more reasonable as they continue this rebuild. So I can see the possible scenario where DeAngelo could possibly be traded, and obviously right now be a shorter term fix for Vegas to squeeze in with their cap situation, but obviously he'd be looking for a bigger raise in the offseason. So certainly a little trickier of a move to make. That's just my thoughts on something they could be looking at. And of course there's some veterans out there as well who are pending UFAs, who would be a pure rental pickup where they could reevaluate in the offseason. They could look to New Jersey for like a Sami Vatanen, or perhaps to the Blackhawks for a guy like Eric Gustafsson. Both those guys have had some pretty decent offensive numbers in the past and very well might prove to be what Vegas is looking for, but it's certainly well known that they're looking for D, and those are their top candidates that many NHL insiders believe that they have interest in. So that is all your latest news and rumor updates for today. Of course, as always, I want to know your thoughts and opinions on all matters discussed here today, so make sure you leave some comments down below and we can discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing, turning on your notifications, and checking out our membership options as well. I'd appreciate it if you did. Thank you very much for watching, everybody, and I will catch you next time.